we made progress on almost all of the central issues. Some places a great deal of progress, other places there's still more work to be done.
Well, that's the U.S. Secretary of State putting a positive spin on his meeting with North Korean officials. But after 2 days of meetings, none of them, including the North Korean leader, Mike Pompeo, could not specify what progress was made. Pyongyang, we should say, gave a much more negative spin. In fact, North Korean officials condemned the American delegation, saying Pompeo had a gangster-like demand for denuclearization, calling the whole affair deeply regrettable. Well, with that, let's bring in David Leventhal in Washington. He's with the Center for Public Integrity. Dave, nice to have you on this weekend. I want to begin here going back a little bit because, after the Singapore summit last month, the U.S. president hailed its success as Donald Trump saying that he and the North Korean leader had a special relationship. Given what we've now seen, these two different interpretations between Mike Pompeo and the officials in Pyongyang, is Donald Trump now learning how difficult it is to negotiate with Kim Jong-un?
There's a certain element, Michael, of the United States and Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump expecting the leopard to change its spots, if you will, that North Korea would act in some just incredibly different way than it has for the past many decades with the United States, just by the force and charm of Donald Trump's will. Well, obviously that's not working out quite in the way that I'm sure Donald Trump would like it to be working out at this point in time. North Korea is a murderous regime. It's one of the most totalitarian countries in the world as we stand here right now. And just because Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un had a summit in Singapore that lasted a matter of a few hours, that the whole world order would change as a result of this meeting seems to be a little bit far-fetched. So at this point, yes, Donald Trump is learning, I think, in very clear terms that North Korea, they have some cards in their hand, and the biggest card of all is the fact that they have nuclear weapons and they don't want to give them up, and that the United States is going to ultimately have to give something, and probably a rather major something on its side in order for North Korea to give up the thing that the United States wants it to give up.
Well, certainly Donald Trump gave Kim Jong-un something that his predecessors refused to do, and that was a one-on-one meeting, essentially giving legitimacy to the North Korean regime. But it is interesting to know just how different the assessments of those meetings are. And in fact, Donald Trump continues to be very optimistic, at least publicly, that denuclearization will come about. I want to play a clip here from Donald Trump, and this was from earlier on this past week.
It was a very smart deal for North Korea. Goodwill is very important. But we signed a wonderful paper saying they're going to denuclearize their whole thing. It's going to all happen.
So he gives Kim Jong-un a meeting that his predecessors refused to do. He now sounds optimistic about a policy which North Korea does not seem to be very enthusiastic about. Is the president undermining his own reputation here?
First of all, give Donald Trump all due credit that he had this meeting. This was something that most people know, and I'll say it again, no president has ever been able to meet with the leader of North Korea. So the fact that Donald Trump has done this is to his credit and to his administration's credit. But we've got some major problems here if you're going to get to the goal of denuclearization. The first one is just the notion of what that means. North Korea and the United States appear to be rather much on different sides as to, number one, if that means North Korea is going to give up all of its weapons. What is the time frame going to be? What's the rubric that North Korea will have to abide by in order to have the United States be satisfied? Are there going to be inspectors? All of this is really up in the air right now. And meanwhile, North Korea appears to be doing nothing, if anything, enhancing its nuclear weapons program as we stand here talking. So there's a lot of details that are incredibly critical, incredibly important, that just simply have not been worked out. So Donald Trump, yes, can say, hey, it's going to happen, everything's going to be fine, but none of the building blocks toward that ultimate goal have really been set in place, Michael, at this point in time.
Okay, well, I want to veer off a little bit from North Korea because there's a couple of important meetings coming up, but we have to note that Trump did meet Kim right after the G7 summit that was held here in Canada, a summit where Trump was clearly offside with the traditional allies, but at the same time praising the North Korean dictator. And this week, we are going to see Donald Trump meeting with NATO leaders, quickly followed by a Helsinki meeting with the Russian president. Are we expecting almost a similar pattern of condemnation on one hand and praise for the other?
You never quite know what you're going to get with Donald Trump in an international setting. I think that's one lesson that everyone has learned, whether you love Donald Trump or loathe Donald Trump during his year-and-a-half-long administration. Let's just go back very quickly to what happened last year with the NATO summit that occurred that Donald Trump attended. It was one where it was very chaotic and very unmooring for a lot of NATO allies of the United States for a couple of reasons. Number one, Donald Trump used this very much as a stage for himself. In a way, he seemed to want to upstage many of the NATO members that were there meeting and representatives at this conference. He physically at one point moved away the Prime Minister of Montenegro, if I recall correctly, to literally get himself forward in a photo that was being taken. But also, too, in a more substantive realm, Donald Trump didn't allow the United States to back Article 5, which is the mutual aid agreement that NATO has, that if one member of NATO is attacked, that the others will come to their aid, to say it in simplified terms. That was something that was very, very, again, unmooring for many NATO allies that said, hey, what's going on with the United States here? This doesn't look that good. So Donald Trump is going to have a lot going on at NATO, and that's obviously going to go right into Russia, too, where many Americans are just wondering what is going to happen when he sits down with Vladimir Putin in a formalized setting, as he apparently will be doing.
Well, we have less than a minute, but I do want to ask about that, though, because what is being said about that in D.C., that Trump makes more positive comments, rather making more positive comments about traditional adversaries rather than traditional allies, and given the Mueller investigation into Russia's election meddling, he's going to sit down with Vladimir Putin.
Well, the Democrats, we all know what the Democrats are going to say about this, which is that Donald Trump is selling out his own country, and he's more concerned about the Russians than he is sometimes about his own close allies, be it France, Germany, Canada, of course, and others. But you're hearing some murmurings even from some Republicans. Bill Frist, the former Senate Majority Leader, a very rock-ribbed Republican, coming out with an op-ed piece just a couple of days ago, basically saying, hey, look, I'm concerned about the way that Donald Trump is acting toward Robert Mueller, who's investigating Russia's infiltration into the U.S. elections during 2016. We, of course, have a midterm election coming up in 2018. And even Roy Blunt, a current high-ranking member of the U.S. Senate, just this morning, was questioning whether Donald Trump was quite on the right path with Russia. He wanted to make sure that everything was going to be okay, if you will. So even within the Republican Party, there are some soft words of warning for the president and effectively telling him to be careful as he sits down with Vladimir Putin.